They didn't just hear him before they saw him. They felt him. The lights would dim, the tunnel would darken, and somewhere in the silence, a figure would crouch low to the ground, hands pressed against the turf like a predator ready to strike. Then came the explosion, the scream, the sprint, the collision that echoed through Veterans Stadium. Quarterbacks feared him. Receivers braced for him. An entire city fed off his fire. They called him Weapon X, a name pulled from comic books, a symbol of rage and relentless force. But legends are easy to celebrate when the lights are bright. What no one saw were the quiet battles, the weight he carried long before the tunnel opened, the nights when the warrior disappeared and only the man remained. Brian Dawkins did not simply play football. He transformed himself. He built something inside that could survive the violence of the game and the pressure of expectation. He gave his body to the hits. He gave his mind to the grind. He gave his peace to the persona that Philadelphia would come to worship. This is not just the story of bone-rattling tackles or Pro Bowl honors. This is the story of a young man from Jacksonville who became the emotional heartbeat of a franchise. The story of faith, fury, depression, leadership, heartbreak, redemption, and legacy. The story of what it truly cost to become Weapon X. You're watching the Eagles Chronicles, where we tell the stories behind the midnight green with the depth and respect they deserve. If you believe greatness is forged, not given, make sure you're subscribed and join us as we uncover the man behind the myth, Brian Dawkins, the man who gave everything and became Weapon X. Before the mask, early life. Long before the tunnel entrances and the name Weapon X, there was just Brian Dawkins, a kid growing up in Jacksonville, Florida, raised in a faith-centered home where discipline and belief were part of everyday life. Born on October 13, 1973, he wasn't handed hype or national attention. What he had was intensity, competitiveness, and a deep emotional nature that often stayed beneath the surface. At Raines High School, his athletic ability began to stand out, but it was at Clemson University where his identity truly started to form. Playing safety for the Tigers from 1992 to 1995, Dawkins developed into a leader, physical, vocal, and relentless. Yet even as his talent grew, so did the internal pressure to prove himself. He was driven not just by ambition, but by expectation, of family, of faith, of himself. By the time he declared for the 1996 NFL Draft, he wasn't a guaranteed star. He was a second-round prospect with potential and fire, still far from the myth he would become. There was no alter ego yet, no crawl through the tunnel, just a young man chasing validation, carrying both belief and doubt, not yet knowing that one day he would create something called Weapon X to survive what was coming. Drafted, not destined. In the 1996 NFL Draft, Brian Dawkins was selected in the second round with the 61st overall pick by the Philadelphia Eagles. It wasn't a headline-grabbing selection, he wasn't projected as a future Hall of Famer, and he certainly wasn't drafted as the face of a franchise. He entered a league that viewed him as talented but unproven, a strong athletic safety who still had to earn everything. Early in his rookie season, he worked his way into the starting lineup, showing flashes of the physicality and range that would later define him. But nothing about those first years suggested a myth in the making. There were no dramatic nicknames yet, no legendary tunnel entrances, just a young defensive back fighting for respect in a rebuilding organization. He had been drafted, yes, but destiny was nowhere in sight. Every rep, every tackle, every snap was still about proving he belonged.
The birth of Weapon X. The name didn't come from a marketing plan. It wasn't handed to him by a coach or stitched onto a jersey. It was created in the quiet space between pressure and survival. As the intensity of the NFL began to rise around him, Brian Dawkins felt something building inside, a need to separate the man from the violence of the game. He was emotional by nature, deeply sensitive, driven by faith and expectation. But on Sundays, that version of him couldn't hesitate. So he built something else. Inspired by Marvel's Wolverine, whose experimental code name was Weapon X, Dawkins adopted the name as an alter ego, a psychological switch he could flip before stepping onto the field. Weapon X wasn't just aggressive, he was fearless, calculated, relentless. The tunnel crawl became ritual, the scream became ignition. When he emerged into the stadium light, it was as if the transformation was complete. Quarterbacks didn't see doubt. Receivers didn't see vulnerability. They saw impact. They saw force. They saw a defender willing to collide without hesitation. But what made Weapon X powerful wasn't just physicality, it was purpose. That persona allowed Dawkins to channel fear into fury, anxiety into aggression, pressure into performance. It was armor. It was survival. And as the hits grew louder and the reputation spread, Philadelphia embraced the myth. They loved Weapon X. They fed off his fire. What few understood was that the mask existed for a reason. Behind it was a man still fighting battles no one could see.
The battle within. On the field, he was unstoppable. Off the field, he was unraveling. At the height of his dominance, Pro Bowls, playoff runs, the roar of Philadelphia chanting his name, Brian Dawkins was fighting a battle far more dangerous than any receiver crossing the middle. The persona of Weapon X had done its job. It protected him, it gave him an edge, it turned fear into fury. But when the stadium lights faded and the adrenaline drained away, the silence returned. And in that silence, doubt was louder than any crowd. Dawkins would later admit that during some of the best seasons of his career, he was struggling with severe depression. He questioned himself relentlessly, his worth, his performance, his identity. There were moments, he confessed, when the darkness became so heavy that he had thoughts no one ever imagines a professional athlete carrying. The world saw a warrior. He felt like two separate people. Brian, the husband, the father, the man of faith, was thoughtful and deeply emotional. Weapon X was violent, explosive, and unbreakable. The problem was learning how to live as both. The alter ego that made him great also demanded something in return. It required him to suppress fear, to bury vulnerability, to carry pressure without complaint. Faith became his anchor. Prayer became his refuge. Slowly, he began to understand that Weapon X could not exist without Brian, and that strength was not the absence of struggle, but the courage to confront it. The hits, the sacks, the interceptions, they were real, but so was the pain. And it is here, in the unseen fight within, that the true cost of becoming Weapon X begins to reveal itself.
Jim Johnson's weapon. When Jim Johnson took control of the Eagles' defense, he didn't just see Brian Dawkins as a safety, he saw a weapon. Johnson's aggressive, blitz-heavy scheme was built on pressure, disguise, and chaos, and Dawkins became its most versatile piece. He wasn't confined to deep coverage, he attacked from every angle. One snap he was locking down a tight end, the next he was blitzing off the edge like a linebacker. Johnson trusted his instincts, his intelligence, and his fearlessness, giving him freedom that few safeties in the league ever had. In 2002, that freedom produced one of the most remarkable defensive performances in NFL history. Dawkins recorded a sack, an interception, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, and a touchdown in a single game. It was the perfect illustration of what Johnson had unleashed. Under that system, Weapon X wasn't just a nickname anymore. He was the engine of a defense that defined an era in Philadelphia. The Super Bowl dream. By 2004, the Eagles were no longer just contenders, they were hardened by heartbreak. 3 straight NFC championship losses had tested the locker room, but instead of breaking, it forged something stronger. With Donovan McNabb playing at an elite level and Jim Johnson's defense suffocating opponents, the Eagles finally broke through, defeating the Atlanta Falcons to claim the NFC title. For Brian Dawkins, it was validation. Years of collisions, leadership, and internal battles had led to this moment. The Super Bowl stage was set. Eagles versus the New England Patriots, a rising contender against a growing dynasty. Super Bowl 39 was everything it promised to be: physical, tense, unforgiving. Dawkins flew across the field, delivering hits that echoed, trying to tilt momentum with sheer force of will. The defense battled Tom Brady possession after possession, but the margin for error was razor thin. In the end, the Patriots prevailed 24-21. Confetti fell, but not for Philadelphia. For Dawkins, the loss cut deeper than statistics could measure. He had given everything, emotionally, physically, spiritually, to reach that stage, and yet it slipped away. There would be no ring to crown the effort, no parade to reward the sacrifice. The dream had been within reach, and that is what made it hurt most. That night didn't diminish Weapon X, but it revealed the cost of chasing greatness in a league where even your best can fall just short.
Leader through chaos. As the Eagles pushed through the early 2000s, talent alone wasn't enough to hold the locker room together. The Terrell Owens drama, media scrutiny around Donovan McNabb, and the weight of repeated playoff disappointments created tension that could have fractured the team. In the middle of it stood Brian Dawkins. He wasn't just the emotional spark on Sundays, he became the steady voice during the week. Teammates leaned on him for accountability and clarity. Coaches trusted him to reinforce standards inside the locker room. While headlines focused on controversy, Dawkins focused on unity. He led by example, through preparation, intensity, and honesty. In moments when chaos threatened to define the season, he anchored the defense and protected the culture. Weapon X brought the fire on the field, but it was Brian Dawkins, the leader, who kept the team from splintering off it. The pain of departure. At the end of the 2008 season, Brian Dawkins was no longer just a player in Philadelphia, he was its defensive identity. 13 seasons, countless collisions, leadership through heartbreak and near misses. But in the NFL, loyalty often collides with business. As Dawkins entered his mid-30s, contract negotiations with the Eagles grew tense. He wanted to finish his career where it began. The organization, looking toward the future, hesitated to commit long-term. For the first time, the man who had given everything to the city felt uncertainty from the team he had poured himself into. When free agency opened in 2009 and Dawkins signed with the Denver Broncos, it wasn't just a roster move, it was a fracture. Fans were stunned, teammates were emotional. Philadelphia wasn't losing a declining veteran, it was losing its heartbeat. For Dawkins, the departure was deeply personal. He had bled for the franchise, played through pain, carried the defense through eras of change, and yet the ending came without the storybook closure he had imagined. Weapon X left the tunnel one final time in midnight green, not by choice, but by circumstance. It was the clearest example of what the title means. He gave everything. And sometimes, even that isn't enough to control how the story ends. Redemption in Denver. When Brian Dawkins signed with the Denver Broncos in 2009, many believed his best years were behind him. Philadelphia had moved on, and at 35 years old, the assumption was that Weapon X was fading. But Dawkins arrived in Denver with something to prove. He immediately became the emotional leader of the defense, setting the tone with the same intensity and preparation that defined his prime. In his first season with the Broncos, he earned a Pro Bowl selection, silencing doubts about his decline and reminding the league that his impact went far beyond age or statistics. By 2011, he helped guide Denver to a playoff appearance, mentoring younger players while still delivering timely plays. It wasn't just about performance, it was validation, redemption.
He may have left Philadelphia under painful circumstances, but in Denver, he proved that Weapon X was never just a product of one city. It was a mindset he carried with him. The body pays the price. Every collision has a cost. For years, Brian Dawkins played the game with reckless devotion, launching into ball carriers, blitzing through linemen, throwing his body into moments most players would hesitate to enter. The crowd saw the violence. They heard the impact. What they didn't see was what it took to recover from it. As the seasons passed, the injuries accumulated, neck stingers, knee issues, lingering aches that never fully healed. Sundays demanded intensity, Mondays demanded resilience. He practiced through pain, played through limitations, and carried the physical toll in silence. Weapon X was built on fearlessness, but fearlessness does not make a body indestructible. By the time his career neared its end, the wear was undeniable. Recovery took longer, the explosions were harder to summon. The fire was still there, but the body that fueled it had absorbed years of punishment. Retirement in 2012 wasn't just a career decision, it was a reckoning. He had given everything, mind, spirit, and muscle to the persona he created. And in the end, the body paid the price for every snap, every hit, and every moment he chose to collide instead of retreat.
Hall of Fame healing. When Brian Dawkins stepped onto the stage in Canton in 2018, it wasn't with a scream or a crawl from the tunnel. There was no smoke, no collision, no alter ego waiting to be unleashed. There was only the man. Inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Dawkins stood before the football world not as Weapon X, but as Brian, reflective, emotional, and honest. His speech wasn't built on bravado, it was built on truth. He spoke openly about his struggles with depression, about the darkness he carried even during the brightest moments of his career. He thanked his faith for sustaining him, his family for grounding him, and Philadelphia for embracing both his fire and his flaws. It was a moment of reconciliation, the warrior and the man finally standing as one. The persona that once protected him was no longer needed. The vulnerability he once feared became his strength. Canton was more than a celebration of tackles and interceptions. It was healing. It was the closing of a chapter defined by collision and the beginning of one defined by clarity. In that moment, Brian Dawkins didn't just enter the Hall of Fame, he reclaimed himself. Long after the final snap, long after the tunnel lights dimmed and the collisions faded into memory, Brian Dawkins' impact has remained. Not just in highlight reels or stat sheets, but in culture, in character, in the standard he left behind. In Philadelphia, number 20 is more than a jersey. It is intensity, it is accountability, it is faith under pressure, it is leadership when everything around you feels unstable. Dawkins didn't just redefine the safety position, he redefined what emotional honesty in professional sports could look like. By speaking openly about depression, by acknowledging his internal battles, he gave others permission to confront their own. By mentoring young players and continuing his work within the Eagles organization, he ensured that Weapon X would never just be a memory. It would be a mindset rooted in preparation, humility, and heart. He gave everything to the game, but in doing so, he gave something even greater to the people watching. Proof that strength is not the absence of struggle, but the courage to rise through it. This has been the Eagles Chronicles, where we honor the legends behind the midnight green and tell the stories that shaped a franchise. If this journey moved you, make sure you like the video, share it with fellow Eagles fans, and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth documentaries on the players who defined Philadelphia football. Because some legends are remembered for their hits, but the greatest are remembered for their heart.